settling into a comfortable posture. So yeah, I'll just give it about just a few minutes for you to work with breath counting. So the idea with counting the breaths is that it's a way to just kind of, it's a very direct way to interrupt thinking and to get a little bit more settled kind of relatively quickly. And it's not a fix. It doesn't always work necessarily, and it has its shortcomings, but it is a nice, simple thing that can slow down the mind just enough so you can kind of be a little bit more present and mindful. So closing the eyes or just lowering your gaze. I like to work with the sensations of breath at the nostrils for this practice. But you can work with the belly. Either way, just start by feeling the breath at some place in the body where you can actually feel the changing sensations of in-breath and out-breath. And then say silently to yourself, in on the in-breath, out on the out-breath.
Asleep, then David.
Now, start to count the breaths, but just count in the space between the end of the out-breath and the beginning of the next in-breath. So what you're doing is you're saying in, out, and then when the breath ends, 1, in, out, 2. So you're dropping the number right in between the out-breath and the in-breath. But only count up to 8. When you get to 8, just go back to 1. Now, if you lose track of the number, just go back to 1. No argument, no negotiating, no trying to figure it out. Just start again. This is not a contest. It's a mental training. In, out, 1, in, out, 2, at your own pace, whatever feels natural. Short breath, long breath. However your body wants the breath. stay with the sensations, not just the words, but feel each breath. Now, this practice is very simple, but it's somewhat mechanical aspects can make it tedious to do for a long period. So I prefer to just use it for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, usually. So let's move now to a more natural mindfulness, continuing to feel the breath, but feel the breath in the larger context of your body, and of that emotional feeling tone. Really feeling yourself where you are. Is the body settled? Or is there some tension or stress that can be released? Keeping the breath in the foreground of experience, but not excluding the broader background of body, feeling, sounds. Naturally, thoughts will pull you away from the present moment. When you notice this, acknowledge the thought, perhaps put a label on it, or notice its theme of the thought, where it's trying to take you. And then come right back to the breath. Well, this is the kind of key moment in practice and part of the art is to see our thoughts without getting entangled in them and without getting entangled in a judgment of them or an analysis. So this then becomes part of the larger project of mindfulness, which is to become more aware of our thoughts in our daily lives, become more aware of our judgments, our biases, our conditioned views. And as we become more aware, then becoming less attached, seeing that they are conditioned, that they are not facts, facts being generated by our mind or information generated by our mind. Some thoughts are easy to let go of, or they just kind of come and go without sticking. But others, not so easy. These are the ones that show us where our attachments are. Sometimes they're expressions of underlying fears. Sometimes they are expressions of our desire for escape, fantasy, planning. Sometimes they're just like the and of generated energy. And we'll start calculating, counting, figuring out some perhaps trivial problem. Now, with any kind of persistent thought, at some point we need to shift to a awareness of the underlying emotional energy that's triggering the thought. So fantasies often come out of kind of boredom, loss of interest. Other strong streams of thought come out of fear. The mind thinks that if it figures something out, finds an answer, that fear can be allayed. Some negative pattern of thought might be coming out of sadness, grief, depression. And as long as we stay on the thought level, we're not fully engaging. That's why we have to turn to the felt experience to allow the emotional level to rise into consciousness. Very often there's a resistance to this, which is why the thinking happens. The thinking is our mind's attempt to deal with the feeling. But our minds can't solve our feelings. Only awareness can heal them, can allow them to play out. They need to be held with awareness and with kindness, with patience, with acceptance. It's one of the real tasks of this practice, to learn to feel in this way. And at the same time, we don't want to turn our practice into an indulgence, just sinking into the feelings. It's a subtle practice of opening and feeling and allowing without getting attached, and coming to intuit when it's time to move the attention away from the feeling, when it's becoming more of a indulgence or obsession, when we need to simply come back to the breath, back to the body. No one can really show you when or how to do this. It's something each of us has to learn to navigate. And there's no perfect way of doing it. Not like we become expert and masters. This is, well, maybe. Maybe. Thank you. I don't usually laugh when I'm giving a guided meditation, but caught myself when I said we don't become masters. I immediately thought of the phrase from the suttas where the Buddha says that once we kind of perfect this one practice, that we become master of the courses of thought. So I thought I ought to quickly correct myself that yes, it is possible to become a master. It's just that, I'm not one. So of course we can become masters. Um, oh, that was kind of fun. Uh, so we arrive at step 3, and seems like we'll have a lot to talk about as we get into this. Step 3 starts on page 51 of One Breath at a Time. Step 3 says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And as we understood him is in italics in the step. The one thing I will say about this step, and I've said it many times, is I can accept the word God, but I cannot accept the word him in the step. The idea that God is male is particularly off-putting, and really just that's sort of such a leftover from the thousands of years of patriarchy and misogyny that we can't let that stand. I can't let it stand. But even sort of getting into that, I mean, that it just is one other way that we can turn against the steps, that we can sort of for those of you who've been in recovery for a while and been to plenty of meetings, and I've seen a lot of newcomers struggle. That people are in some ways always looking for an out, looking for some excuse to not really work a program and to not really work the steps. And so whether it's God, I don't believe in God, or this sexism, I can't do this, or I'm not powerless, and we hear the list, and I can appreciate that. I mean, I guess that's one of the big reasons why I do this work, to try to translate the steps into something more palatable for people who are turned off by some of the language, and certainly I am turned off by some of the language myself. So today I'm just going to talk about this introductory part of the step. That first of all, just sort of, I try to demystify it, demystify step 3 by saying there's nothing mysterious about this process. It's not a magical ritual. It doesn't require special grace to accomplish. What it requires is commitment. When we, quote, make a decision, unquote, we are committing ourselves to our spiritual life, committing to placing that at the center of our lives as the guiding principle. And I'm not sure that's entirely clear to someone who first engages the steps, that this is about a commitment. I'm kind of starting by saying that the word decision is the kind of key word here, rather than God. And I think there's this tendency to kind of immediately zoom in on God and turning my will and my life over to God, and there's some sense of that as a religious kind of expression, which it has obviously religious overtones. But I think that is a distraction from the real work. Um, so, I do notes on all these steps on the book, and at some point I may put the notes up somewhere. I could just put them on my website probably. People want to be able to access them for themselves. I've been doing a lot of work on my website, Sidelight there. Um, so 3 forms of commitment to sobriety itself, or to being clean and sober, or whatever program you're working, commitment to that, commitment to the steps in the program, which are 2 different things, right? Committing to your own, well, I use the word sobriety. I know doesn't cover every addiction, but committing to that is different from committing to working the steps and working the program. So those are 2 commitments that we can talk about. And then the third is committing to Buddhism or the Dharma. And ultimately, for me, and I guess the implication of Buddhism and the 12 steps is the idea that Buddhism is going to be, in fact, the way that we commit to the steps, that through the lens of Buddhism. So as I was thinking about this idea of commitment to, more broadly to a spiritual life, well, I do say that here, to our spiritual life, committing to placing that at the center of our lives. What came up for me is, well, what's the alternative? And of course, as an addict, yeah, okay, we're maybe committed to our addiction in a way, right? In that kind of way that becomes central to our lives. But I was thinking about it in a broader way, I guess, beyond just addiction, and how what our society kind of expects us to commit to, which is not to a spiritual practice or to spiritual principles. So, society expects us to commit to work, and wants us to commit to work, to accumulation, to consumption, to power, to success, and those aren't necessarily bad things, but this is what kind of the capitalist society, the economically driven, financially driven society, in some way doesn't care about our spiritual condition, right? And I guess the point to me is that if we buy into that fully, if we grow up and think, what's going to really bring meaning to my life is, having all the money and all the power, and having worldly success and sort of a recognition or fame or whatever, that when that becomes the guiding principle of our lives, we lose connection with our spiritual essence, with the real longing for love, for connection, for meaning, for purpose. So, I mean, I guess that's outside, to some extent, it's outside the realm of addiction. But one of the things that happens, I guess the connection we can make here is that when we are sort of led by those principles, what we are kind of promised in return is that we'll get to have pleasure, and food and alcohol and sex and drugs, or entertainment, distraction, all of that's going to be what we get out of it. Like, okay, yeah, you're gonna have to work 90-hour weeks to become a partner in the law firm, but then you're going to have the house in the Bahamas, and you're going to have plenty of money to pay for the alimony for this first wife, and uh, and that sort of, for many people, that you play that out and it unravels to the point that we become addicts, right? I mean, you don't have to, that's not the only way to become an addict. I had no success or money or power and I became an addict, but that certainly, can be an end result of this. So just, I don't know, that, maybe that, I'm not sure that's a place that we need to go, or but it's just sort of what came up for me. I felt like I needed to kind of contrast what it is that we're committing to in step 3 to what the worldly life asks us to commit to. And seeing that, I guess, it's also pointing to how, addiction and addictive behavior and isn't just an isolated personal thing, that it's also tied in with these larger social, economic forces. And that, the cynical view of that is that it's all part of sort of the exploitation of being exploited by by the system, or maybe, if you want to personalize it, by some powerful elite. But the less cynical view is that people are driven by these impulses, and whether we're addicts or not, we all crave comfort, safety, and that craving, in which, I guess Bill Wilson talks about this in the 12 and 12, about how the instincts could have gone awry, that natural craving for safety and security and comfort in an addict sort of runs out of control. In any case, what interrupts this is spiritual awakening. And for an addict, that spiritual awakening starts by admitting they're powerless, right? So just to get back to this introduction to the book, when I started to work with these ideas, and even as I was writing One Breath at a Time, people started to reach out to me, people who kind of heard about it. I guess I was talking about it. And I saw that one of the things people were hoping I was going to offer in my book was a way to work the steps without God. And, that wasn't what I was trying to do. As I say here, I think that Buddhism offers a more profound understanding of higher power than the one I got as a Catholic boy. And as I say, that's not to say Catholicism doesn't offer a profound vision of God, only that I never went beyond that childish understanding. So this is a starting point for me, that we can work with the idea of Buddhism, with Buddhist principles, and the idea of higher power, and we can make them work together. And clearly, that's not true, I know, for everyone. And that's indeed really why where Noah Levine sort of went off and came up with refuge recovery. Now recovery Dharma now is an offshoot of that, after the problems that Noah has had, the accusations of sexual misconduct. So I think, just refuge recovery, just I feel like it sort of needs to be acknowledged. It didn't exist at the time I wrote this book, and interestingly, Noah gets quoted several times in this book when he was still kind of working with the idea of higher power, but he came to a point where he completely rejected it. And and he and I actually kind of somewhat fell apart as friends, partly around that, which is kind of weird. But there was more to it than that. But I just want to first of all acknowledge my respect for that approach. Um, that I don't feel like, well, I've got the way to work the 12 steps and this with Buddhism, and this is how you should do it, and everything else, nothing else works. At the same time, I can't help but see that the way that refuge, the three refuges in Buddhism, the refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, taking refuge, which is the traditional way of kind of expressing your commitment to Buddhism, in my mind, is a perfect parallel to the step three. So there you go. So nonetheless, just to acknowledge like some of the reasons that people really do have a problem with the idea of higher power. I'll read this little section here. Some people may have been raised with no religious beliefs. So that's much more common today than it was when I was growing up. When I was growing up, everybody kind of went to church, it seemed. I mean, presumably they didn't, because it's just amazing how narrow our sort of worldview can be. Well, I go to church, I'm sure everybody goes to church, right? But some may have been raised with no religious beliefs, as I say, increasingly true. So people come to the steps and they're like, what does this even mean? So that's hard. Others feel betrayed or disillusioned by their faith. This is another very common problem, right? Whether it's just whether you just feel sort of disillusioned by the general ideas or by specific hypocrisy that we see, or even more personal, wounding people who have been abused by religious teachers or leaders. Now that's a rough one. If you've been really betrayed or traumatized directly through some by some religious person, to come to something that has those overtones can be very difficult. Many are accustomed to denying the existence of anything that can't be proved scientifically. And I think this is probably the most common problem people have with the idea of God. We just live in a very sort of scientifically based world. And that's sort of the one lens we have for understanding the world, which is, a corrective for sure from thousands of years of, superstition, mythology. But it's definitely, it risks taking us so far away from anything spiritual that we really lose contact with some really essential human longings. Step 3 completes the surrender initiated in step 1. In that step, we acknowledge the ways we are powerless over substances. In this step, we seek out and commit ourselves to accepting a spiritual power. We move from trying to cope with the world through manipulating our consciousness with gross physical intoxication to attuning ourselves to a subtler realm wherein acceptance and alignment with truth brings a deeper and truer transformation. It's not a bad little sentence there. We move from trying to cope with the world through manipulating our consciousness with gross physical intoxication, to attuning ourselves to a subtler realm wherein acceptance and alignment with truth brings a deeper and truer transformation. So, what I think is important about this idea is that um, is the subtlety, right? It's and this is where intoxication makes it really difficult to attune to anything subtle. It's gross, in the not in the term gross as disgusting, but gross as large, uh, dense. Um, I I used to try to meditate uh, when I was after smoking pot, and it didn't go well. I can say that. There was definitely dizziness involved, uh, and the just interesting, like how disconnected from my body I would feel in that state. Like just the simplest thing, like just feeling the breath or just feeling the body. It wasn't there. Um, so this idea of attuning ourselves to a subtler realm, this is it doesn't say that in the steps, but certainly that's what Buddhist meditation is doing, right? It's attuning us to a subtler realm, and it and just the subtlety of the physical realm. It gives us a lot of um, of material to work with. The the When we start to meditate and things start to quiet a little bit, we start to experience our body completely different from the way we ordinarily do. And it's quite interesting. And it can become actually freaky, you know. You go on a longer retreat and the mind, you get really concentrated. Jack Kornfield talks about this stuff in A Path with Heart, how the whole perception of the body, he talks about the body as turning into just a field of light. I often talk about the body as a field of energy, how we're feeling it. There can be a lot of actual distortion in perception, but that distortion in perception is actually pointing to the fact that perception is conditioned. Do I want to go down this one? Let me try this a little bit. So the idea that perception is conditioned is essentially that we start with the idea that so perception is just, in Buddhist terms, just means how we label things, essentially, how we name them. So my computer is sitting on what I call a table, right? But I can look at it and see that it's got these component parts that are not table. There's a flat thing on the top. There are these long things that I call legs that hold it up. But that's, I just look at it and see table. However, it could be turned upside down and perform a completely different function. So on the meditative level, what happens is that our ordinary way of perceiving the body is as this dense thing with certain sensations that are related to the contact that the body is having at a particular moment, or that are related to internal things that are happening, like if you're sick or you're healthy. And then so you're kind of naming them and putting them all in a category, and then you don't think about them anymore. You don't have to question them anymore. So when your perception shifts, when you're sitting in meditation and all of a sudden your body feels like energy or light, or all of a sudden it feels really heavy or it feels really light, that's your perception is changing. And you realize that the way you normally think about your body, the normal sensations that you perceive in it, are just one spectrum, and that spectrum is much broader than you realized. You start to see that it feels safer if you can say, well, this is what my body feels like. This is what body is. That I can operate in the world just like this is it. I don't have to think about it. With meditation, when we go deeper in and perception changes, we realize, oh, that's just a conditioned way of viewing it. The reality is different from that. And of course, quantum physics tells us that, right? That our body isn't really a solid thing. That the sense of it being this object is just, again, conditioned. And so that insight then leads to the broader insight that, oh, everything that I think about the world and all the ways that I perceive about the world are conditioned. And it's always possible to take a different viewpoint and to question that conditioning. So that means that I don't have to be stuck in one limited view of things. On just a very normal social level, this can help us just to say, oh, that person's behavior, we can go into someone else, we can think about how someone else is viewing the world, instead of everything just being my view of things. It's like, oh, they're behaving in this way that I find really annoying and irritating, and I'm making all these assumptions about who they are and why they're doing something purely through the lens of how it affects me. But if I shift my idea to, oh, what if I were them? How are they perceiving things? Then I realize, oh, their reality is completely different. Their understanding is completely different. And all of a sudden I can have sympathy or compassion for them, when previously I was like, you're just an asshole, and now I can be like, whoa, maybe you're seeing reality from a different viewpoint. So so that's one of the very practical ways that having insight into the conditionality of perception can change how we operate in the world. And there's lots of other ways that it can, but I don't have time to talk about them all, and I don't know them all anyway. But I noticed that there have been a few comments, so I want to look at some of the comments. Abstinence, renunciation, generosity, forgiveness, service. These are contrary to our base instincts. Yes, thank you. Where are we in the reading? Great. That's the beginning of step 3. Starts on page 51. Regarding only believing in scientifically proven theories, metaphysics is science and spoken about by many spiritual leaders. That's right. Well, yeah, thank you. Meditating on cocaine is even more weird. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Mentioned books last meeting, Golf in the Kingdom. Yeah, for the golfing Buddhist. Thank you. Lincoln and the Bardo. Oh, these are good. Thank you for these good book suggestions. I haven't read that. The Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. Yeah, that's good. That one I will put on my website. I'm not sure I'm going to put Golfing in the Kingdom on my website, but do you take mulligans in your golf? Generally, no. I occasionally, on my first drive, I will, but I also will say that there are times when I bend the rules out of compassion for myself. So that is to say, a silly short putt that I knew I could have made and I didn't bother to carefully line up, I might give it to myself. So, okay. Yes, I have been questioned about my philosophy of self-compassion in golf, but you got to survive. Okay, now you guys are going off the rails. Oh, thank you for that. There's a suggestion about my microphone. Yeah, it says I sound fine, but I'll check that out. By the way, just so you know, Angela, who's a regular part of this meeting, has been recording these. And now I've got my YouTube, I guess I mentioned this before, I've got my YouTube channel operating, and I'm putting all of the video up on YouTube, and then I'm keeping the audio on my website. It didn't really work to have that video on my website because of the size, but just about out of time. Anybody want to ask a question out loud? Meanwhile, I'll put in the Donna information.
Hi, this is Susan. Can I just say something real quick?
You can, unmute yourself if you want to say something.
Hi, this is Susan.
No? Nobody wants to say anything?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Susan.
Oh, hi. I just
But I
wanted
don't
to
know,
say something.
Kevin, can you hear?
Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Wow, I'm not. I'm seeing you talking,
Kevin
Susan,
can't
but I'm not hearing you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're not muted. So maybe. All right.
You may have switched your internal speaker unit when you were doing your audio stuff.
I'm hearing you though.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Now I hear you.
All right. Maybe I'd like to just say something about the meditation
Yeah.
and the counting. When you instructed us to put the counting, the number at the pause between the breath,
Yeah.
it was just sort of magical for me. It just laser focused me on, I just immediately got in touch with the body and feelings and everything. It just really, really helped me concentrate. I guess part of it is in my meditation, I'm kind of always aiming for that spot.
Yeah.
The pause between the breath, but somehow to try to drop the number in there really pulled the whole thing together. Anyway, it was effective for me.
Good. Yeah, and I have to give credit for that one. That particular system, I believe it actually comes from Utejaniya Sayadaw, but I read it recently in Lee Brasington's book, Right Concentration. And I was working with it on a self-retreat back in February and found it effective, right? Because it's the idea, it forces you to notice that particular point, that particular moment. And so it keeps you on edge in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without getting lost in the search for it, because the mind is busy with the counting and the in out the whole time. And then, I don't know, it just really worked for me.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. It just, use it, don't abuse it.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm familiar with that principle.
yeah. I just mean, like, I don't know what I mean.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah, okay, good. Why 8? So the reason for 8 is that counting to 10 is a really common thing to do that you can get on automatic pilot. And so the suggestion is using a different number that's not sort of, your mind isn't used to it. So it forces you to be more present with it. So Jeffrey is asking me to remind people about, he's doing this thing called Rock Steady Fest. It's on Facebook, and it's music for sober people. I was part of the last show, so if you're interested in hearing some live music, live as live as we're able to be at this point, real time music, we'll call it. Check that out. Each you could change. Yeah, someone is mentioning so maybe change the number each time you use this tool. You could do that. You could. Yeah. Yeah. What else? Any other thoughts before we go? I wanted to just double check. Oh, goodness. So, no, I lost my notes. I have them on my computer. Yeah. Well, just on a practical level, yeah, I think I will create a page or on my website where I'll just put PDFs of my notes for the different steps. I've been, as I mentioned, I've been kind of reworking my website and trying to, I found things like links to dead people on there that it's not good, very outdated. So, and I'm going to add a lot more books to it. And I've got a clearer link to the video and the audio. What else did I do? Well, there's a page about Donna on there now. So, my friends, thank you for coming this morning. Just this sort of unreality of this continuing situation, and now as it kind of opens up some, and there's sort of like, is this normal, or is it how normal should it be? Really difficult to navigate emotionally. So just keep taking care of yourself in whatever ways you can, and to me that's a broad spectrum. Meditating is part of it, connecting with people, being able to go outside or take a walk with a friend and 6 feet apart, whatever. Anyway, I'm not here to give you guys advice on your lifestyle. I just want you to all be okay. So we'll Angela also put in the link to my new Facebook page. So that's been set up. So I'm putting in little quotes from my books and stuff on there, and on all my events, everything will be there. That's an easy way to find me. So thanks, Angela. Okay, you guys, be well, stay safe. I'll be back Friday evening, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Bye.